Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me turn all this other nonsense off. Hello, welcome to another Bold Explorer live reading with me, Richard Vobes. Lovely for you to join. Lovely, lovely to see you. I didn't know which way around to say that. Lovely for you to join me. Well, it's lovely for me to join you. Well, whatever. Anyway, welcome along. It's Friday, the 2nd of October 2020, as I record this at 4 o'clock in the UK. And we're going to do another reading from our Book of Sussex Peep Show by Walter Wilkinson. And we're on chapter 6, Across the Weald to Tennyson. But before we start, hello to Turbo Stream, to Philip Hammond and Fiona, to Archie Jenner, to Anne H, to Diana Rolfe, to Justine Jones and John F. So there we go. And one more sleep before we go on our canal boat. The lovely Julia and I have been sorting out and packing bits and pieces and all of that. And I don't know, I was just idling on my computer for a while after trying to look up the route that we're going. Hello to Lee Lawson, by the way, and to Billabong O'Neill. Nice to see you. And I stumbled across some old VHS, what do you call it? Not transcripts, but digitizing from some old VHS tapes, discovering that I was in the bath as a young man with my two kids, who at the time only had two, in 1994. And one of them is little Georgie and Stanley. I mean, they're so young, and we're all in the bath with the bubble bath and all the rest of it. And Dawn, my ex-wife, was filming this little sequence. I don't know whether it's a good thing to look back at your former self. I was like, terrible. Anyway, that was just by the way, but it made me smile as I was fiddling around getting stuff ready. Hello to Teresa McKelvey and to Michael White. Make sure you head the correct way up the Thames, or it could end up badly. Yes, absolutely. We don't want to end up down at Tower Bridge. All I know is that we turn right. North. So we're on chapter 6. Let's see how far we go with this one. Across the Weald to Tennyson. The utility was gone, and affairs carried the show away from the Downs northward towards Surrey. The Pulborough-Petworth road was brisk with traffic, and being alone with a heavy barrow, I missed my companion and was annoyingly occupied with steering the craft past the flying vehicles. No sooner did one get away from the hills than pedestrian life seemed impossible. One was shut in a sewer to walk precariously with noise and speed and horrid devilish whiffs of petrol, while the Downs became, in the imagination, all that was sweet and lovely, a high oasis of natural life above all this throbbing traffic. At Southam Bridge, a piece of work of the 14th century and one of the most admired Sussex monuments, I should have rested sentimentally for a considerable time, but I defy any romantic traveller to lean and moralise over those handsome arches in these days, or to stand and admire the not very clear reflection of the Arun, of the surrounding black populace in the muddy waters of the Arun. Beg your pardon, Mr. Sentence out there. It's interesting. He stopped at he stopped at Southam Bridge, didn't he already? I can't remember where. I seem to recall that he did briefly stop there because he was on the way to Petworth and then turned back to Storrington. The poor old bridge has lived for centuries. It's been an example to bridge builders and a precious gem to generations of artists. But now the cars flash over it heedlessly, exulting in their youth and speed, glorying in their metalliferous smartness. The only concern to the motorist is its narrowness, and with annoyed and anxious faces they set their machinery to rallentando, peer peevirishly into the other end of towards the other end of the bridge for opposition traffic, and speculate, no doubt, upon the comic state of the backward country roads. It will have to go, that old bridge. These latter-day vandals will soon see to that. Well, I'm pleased to say that Southam Bridge has not gone, but it has been isolated now and closed off to traffic. A newer bridge, I forget when, I think in the 80s, wasn't it, the new bridge was erected? So it sweeps past it, and so the old bridge is still there, thank goodness. And so I crept over the arching bridge as carefully and as quickly as possible, scraping the 14th century stones on the one hand, and being myself very nearly scraped by the 20th century steel and grass and upholstery on the other, not stopping until the road widened, and I came to a letterbox, where, of course, vagabonds write their letters. Actually, that would be interesting to know if that letterbox is still there. As I wrote, the cars roared by. Roar, rush, flash. The wind from their passing blew up the sheet of paper, and the noise of them assaulted my thoughts. But the greatest ignominy of them all was when one of the vehicles drew up, and the driver, seeing such a strange phenomenon as a man standing on his feet, requested me to open a gate. To such sorry. It's funny how you, I bet, obloquy is the pedestrian subject in these days. Obloquy. How do you pronounce that? I moved on with the, I ought to know it, it's embarrassing sometimes you come across these words. Here am I, man of the world. I moved on with the show, climbing a hill and descending another, which brought me to Petworth. Yes, you do descend a hill and you do come down the other end of it. Widespread village with an old watermill. That's true. It's no longer a watermill. The famous Swan Inn with its collection of paintings represented by passing artists. They're still there. And a pleasant green effect of meadows and trees about the Rother. That's still there. There was no inviting pitch for the show, and I pulled on with the idea that some better opportunity would turn up later in the evening, but hoping secretly that it would not. The vagabond show business had become submerged by all that splendid traffic. On the busy road it had all got a little out of key, and I was looking forward to a free and pleasant camp in a meadow more than to opposing... into a pleasant camp in a... I was looking forward to a free and pleasant camp in a meadow more than to opposing a very old-fashioned against the very latest. And I was looking forward to a free and pleasant camp in a meadow more than to opposing a very old-fashioned against the very latest. And yet I was not the only madman walking on his legs. It was while sitting on the bank for a moment that a strange sound surprised my ears. In this age, so expert in screws and bolts and suave springings, we are not used to rattling wheels and squeaky hubs, and yet there seems to be a whole army of loose wheels approaching. In a moment, the cause of this racket came round the green bush at the corner, a wild, ragged figure of an unshaven man surrounded by a scarlet berry. He was leading a restive bicycle, to which was attached a wobbling truck, a dirty box on tireless perambulator wheels, and packed with a mass of rags. The strange figure came to a halt, and without speaking ran a cool, calculating eye over my comparative smart equipage. Finally he looked at me and spoke. He does de road for... He does de road for Chucham. Eh? Can you get to Chucham? Chucham? Yo, Chucham. Chucham? Yo, this road goes to Petworth. Is it near there? Perchfith? Dunno. Chucham. Well, if you go that way, you come to Petworth. Patchworth? Hey? That's Patchworth. We seemed to be at a deadlock, and the wild figure rummaged in his ragged coat and discovered a dirty scrap of paper, which he unfolded and handed to me. It contained a long list of names of towns ending with Torquay, and I gathered that this was some sort of route he was following. But he would tell me nothing. When I wondered if he was not English, but perhaps Spanish or French, he agreed to both, with a vague "yaw" and amiable grins. He had lost all interest in the route, and only examined my barrow closely, and finally asked how much the wheels had cost. When I told him, he grimaced horribly, shrugging his shoulders, and began to move off. "Revermershon on an accordion," he growled hoarsely, "and flint some tea, eh?" The shaggy-raggy vagabond rattled and shambled off down the road with the figure of a performing bear, and before I did the same, in the opposite direction, he had stopped at some cottages to extract wild and energetic music from his accordion. An unusual Latin artist of the road for these days, with gaiety in his noisy music and an endearing appeal in his figure as he looked up at the cottage windows. After this encounter, all did not seem lost for the good cause of vagabondage, and I trudged on through the village, up the hill under the trees, and by the high common which stretches out to the north, which with ravishing glades that inspire camping, and repelling notice boards which scold and warn and threaten and keep you from doing so. What a relief it was to turn from the high road and to come to a shy farm with a bright flower garden and trimmed trees, and to find a farmer, labourers and children all trustfully and innocently interested in your camping, pointing out to you the highest and driest patch in the fields from where you got the best views. The best view, yes, and they even provided you with spiritual welfare, and they wanted you to have the best view. I wonder if he's pulled up there at Lee Dallen's farm, obviously of 90 years ago. I wonder whether Lee Dallen's grandfather was around. That would be amazing, wouldn't it? Let's just see. Make sure you correct the headways. I enjoyed your walk today. Nice to see the places in the book, says Michael White. Yes, thank you. Afternoon from an unreasonably droll, wet and windy Madrid. Oh, it's wet and horrible here. The good cause of vagabondage. Absolutely. On the grass beneath the oaks, the uncomfortable impression of the restless road passed away. Here, within a few yards of the tent, were rabbits nibbling the green blades, while undisturbed birds sang in the trees. The meadow fell away to the hedge in the bottoms, to the great elm trees, and more fields beyond. And here, with here a comfortable great barn, and there a timbered cottage at the corner of the wood, the blue smoke of its chimney drifting lazily into the air. This was Sussex again, a world of rich pasture and heaping hay, of immense, curling elms, rising from the corners of green, shapely fields, and a distinguished note in the line of blue downs in the background. It was the natural, spacious world of beauty and, dare we say, laziness, with which the human body and spirit could mingle easily and harmoniously. The eye was pleased with the variety of form and colour, the mind with an ascendancy of life and hope in discovering that there is a sustaining energy in the world other than the fussy inventiveness of businessmen. And yet the uncomfortable road and all that it represented was only a few yards away, and when I came to cross it to get a bucket of water from the cottage, it was an adventurous business. A stream of vehicles passed before I could make a dash for the cottage gate. Arriving there, I hoped to escape into the safety of the garden, but the gate was locked, and the cottager came down the path apologising and explaining that it was not intended to keep anyone from coming in, but to prevent his children, in a childish moment, from rushing out into the murderous stream of traffic. The gate was scrupulously locked while I drew water from the well, then unlocked, and locked again behind me. Greater precautions could hardly have taken place in the days of marauding neighbours. The cottager had had a dog killed, and he thought it might easily have been a child, or a camper, I thought, and remembering that to me, a pedestrian, all motorists are potential murderers, I clutched the bucket, looked left and right, and put a foot onto the road, and withdrew it hastily to let a nasty, low little sports affair, with its horrid works exposed, rattle and pant its way to perdition. Then I dashed across the track, scrambled over the field gate, and breathed again the Sussex air. But another rapid vehicle was already tearing over the tar behind me. Trying to think, if that is the road from Petworth, that's not a very busy road even today. I mean, it's relatively busy, but not quite as busy as he makes. And this is 90-odd years ago. How bizarre. Once in the field again, life went easily. Living in a tent, the nights can often pass curiously quickly. One sleeps lightly, awakening occasionally to be aware of the outdoor world, of the hard ground, the wind, and the oak boughs against the sky, and in the morning I picked up again with the strange sensation that evening, night, and morning were all one. Only the action was reversed. There was a packing up instead of an unpacking, and pulling the barrow off the grass onto the road instead of turning from the road into the meadow, and the walk of the evening before began again as I continued my way to Petworth. A cyclist asked for information as to the roads and became informant himself, sending me the longer and easier way which missed the great hill into the town from the south. It proved a quiet road passing by farms and sleeping meadows, entirely dignified and leading one into the country town of Petworth in a proper spirit. Now, I'm just going to pause there because didn't he say who went to Byworth? I mean, he was practically there. This is most odd. Right at the beginning, he said he went to Byworth. I mean, he must have been in pretty much the same place because he went over Stopham Bridge. Unless he's just confused when he wrote this about going there and then he turned round because he was trying to make for Petworth, didn't they? And then they didn't get there. I'm going to have to reread that bit again because that's a bit odd. Anyway, Morris says this chap doesn't like the infernal combustion engine, and no, absolutely. I guess in the 30s, I'm just thinking now. I imagine in the 30s the motor car, relatively new, but not had been around for 2 decades, hadn't it? But more prevalent in the 30s than before, and I assume that they were louder because the engines weren't as refined as they are today, and perhaps more people were taking to them because they were encouraged by things like the Dunlop book and other tourist things. And of course he is somebody in the countryside, a man of the rural countryside, and so perhaps they seemed far noisier and more noticeable, and perhaps we are semi-unconscious of them because they are just a constant rumble now, which is quite a sad thing to think about. Laura says that we have deer browsing on blackberry leaves outside our window. How lovely. Sounds like he wrote this long after his journey, says Michael White. Yes, although there's certain facts, that he's clearly got absolutely spot on. Anyway, he's coming into Petworth. It proved a quiet road, passing by farms and sleeping meadows, entirely dignified and leading one into the country town of Petworth in a proper spirit. It was no hour for exhibiting the show, and abandoning the barrow on the ancient cobbles under the town hall. I wonder if he came in from the north then, came in on the south, but maybe instead of just trying to think how he would have got up, avoiding the hill, he said. But he was coming in from Fittleworth. It's curious because there's two ways he could have gone. He could have carried on west, passing Lee Dallen's farm, and then joining the Chichester to Petworth Road, or there's a turning, and he could have turned right up to Petworth, which I suppose could be gleaned as a slightly longer road, because he mentioned didn't he not mention the well diggers? That's up that way, isn't it? And if he comes in through the north, he would have come in past Gog and Magog, 2 hills up that way, and then he would have come in next to, there's a pub up there, I can't remember the name of the pub, and then he would have come in from the east. Maybe that's what he does, and then come down down that street, past all the antique shops, and come into the Leconfield Hall, which is where he is. So maybe he did that then. Anyway, it was no hour, and I wandered about the narrow streets in search of simple comestibles. The great house and its pictures are the proper sight in Petworth for the well-regulated traveller, but I went down the steps to an old shop to buy a loaf, and across the marketplace to another dark shop to buy a paper. It is a calm, compact town, with domesticity in the narrow streets, and cats sleeping among the aspidistras, and lace curtains in the parlour windows at your elbows. The cottages lean at all angles, and have white steps before them spanning the cobbled gutter by the roadside. I lived in Petworth for 2 years, so this is interesting. The roofs undulate with age, and the chimney stacks are a medley of surprising designs. If you went down Lombard Street, this would certainly describe it. There are the large red brick houses with white pillared doorways, the genteel residences of 200 years ago. And as you enter the town, there is a handsome stone chapel-like facade, but behind its dignity there lurks the gasworks, and on its face a large date which astonishes you by revealing the fact that Petworth was lit by gas nearly 100 years ago. Most things, the gasworks, that's interesting. Yes, because up there was the old correction house, the House of Correction, or the prison, but not in the 1930s, I don't think. Most things in Sussex have been written up into handsome tomes, but there must still be room for a couple of volumes with plates of the ancient Sussex gasworks, probably by Philip Mercer. The anticipation and realisation of the pleasures of Petworth soon fell away, and coming down the hill and passing under the wall overhung with the great chestnut trees of the park, I was once again in the quiet Sussex Weald. And I shall treasure that passage through Petworth, because in these days of ribbon development, it is not always possible to enter the sharp confines of a compact town on a hill and walk out of the other end through a clean division of town and country. Petworth belongs to the fairy tale age and is an illustration of a wealth of romantic literature. And that's very true about modern towns, isn't it? How, the heart of a town is the old town, but you've got to go through ribbon development, and now not so much ribbon development, but all these these little ghettos or prison blocks of new builds before you reach the town. Andrew Norris just arrived. Nice to see you, Andrew Norris. All the afternoon I trudged through this inland Sussex with small distant figures in the fields wielding hand hoes, working at agriculture as a handicraft for the world, as if they were still Anglo-Saxons. These rugged fields and labourers presented a curious contrast to the representatives of our industrial age who flashed on the road in immaculate clothing, shut away from the air and the wild surface of the earth, in cars like hearses. The blazing sun came down on the hawthorn and gorse. The road mounted a hill, passed under the shade of a wood, descended and wandered past aged farms and bits of common, where, in the cool shade at the edge of the bracken, flourished the bright wild flowers. Here you come to Sussex of the last generation of painters, a bit of common with a leaning gatepost, a timbered cottage with many flowers, of course, and, between the trees, a patch of very blue in the distance. Approaching North Chapel, aha, we now know where he is. He's on the, what is that, the 286? The 283? The A283, North Chapel, going north from Petworth, know exactly where you are. Approaching North Chapel, you're surprised by the proximity of the Surrey Hills and of the great Black Down, on the top of which lived the poet Tennyson. I suppose that nowhere in the world are there so many invitations to tea as in Sussex, nor so many old forge tea rooms, old mills, old Tudor cottages, this old this and that and all the others where you take tea in company with obtrusive old oak beams looking very new and are waited upon by real ladies. It was a tiny flint cottage of the genuine sort, which with but a large advertisement that caught me, and I found myself in a minute living room with a baby in a cradle on one side by the fire and a black cat seated in the best chair in the other. An old goody and her grandson prepared the tea and sat down to watch me eat every mouthful. The boy was too shy to converse, but the old lady was anxious to know if I had any racing information to give away, and if I had any luck over the Derby. She herself had been unfortunate, but her neighbour over the road had put 2 shillings on the winter, and was now the heroine of the district. The old lady could not quite calculate the exact amount, but anyway, the neighbour had won a good bit, and raised in her mind the fever of betting. There was a charming panelled corner cupboard in the room, an elegant little oak table, and on the mantelpiece a pendulum clock with hand-painted flowers on its dial. The scene was perfect, but the tea was very bitter, the butter had no taste, and the cakes were poisonously coloured affairs made from some desiccated mixture, and my mind went back to those unadorned days when casual cottage teas, unadvertised, were considerably better than these very much advertised affairs nowadays. If you want the good old-fashioned homemade food in Sussex, you must go to the most elegant, sophisticated tea shop you can find, where you may discover a good plain scone, a wholesome cake, and even some decent bread and butter. North Chapel produced a small audience and some pennies for the showman, and a steep hill to pull up, but a cheerful labourer put down his tools on the bank and lent his rugged weight to the task. This village, on its southern slope, looks out over the Weald to the Downs, and from its latticed windows and diamond panes there is a great world to be seen in all its changing aspects. Given a house, a wife, a family, friends, a garden and a workshop, life could be lived to the full in North Chapel. For it has a village hall, an inn with a tree outside, Oh yes, the tree outside's probably the big chestnut tree. A cricket pitch on the green, and an omnibus passes every 3 hours for Petworth or Hazelmere, if you should want a joy ride to the dentist at any time. A little beyond Fisher Street, I came to an unsuspicious farm. Startled the old farmer by rattling the blue and green barrow into his yard, and asked if I could put up the tent somewhere for the night. He could not recommend his meadow, for there was a nasty cow in it. Aye, very nasty cow. But he led me off to his rickyard and settled me in its shelter, with a view looking out to Blackdown Hill. He grumbled at the weather, saying it was the worst season he had ever known. And I'm 78, and I've seen some. 78? Have you always lived here? Oh, dear me, no. I was a gardener to Lord Tennyson that lived up on that hill there. I worked for him, first on the Isle of Wight, and then I came here. The farmer gardener treated me to a long account of his troubles on the hill, how the garden was at the bottom and the top, and the house at the top, and the amount of climbing he had to do. But I wanted news of the poet, and asked for it. Well, the old gentleman didn't think much of gardening. He liked to see things rough. He couldn't bide fur the bushes to be trimmed or the flowers tidied up. He weren't no gardener, but what he liked to go was to see a field of crocuses, blue and white crocuses, coming up in the grass. He would go and stand and look at them for hours. That's what he liked. Did he ever talk to you? Oh, course, we used to see him walking about, mostly with a nurse when I was here, but we never took no notice of him no more notice than we would of you, sir. If he passed me in the garden, I used to touch my hat, but he never said anything, just nodded and walked on as if he'd seen nothing. But they really said he noticed everything and knew a lot. Her ladyship, she was the kindest lady I ever did see, but I never took any notice of him. Of course, there was a rare lot of folk used to go up the hill just to have a look at the house. One day, when I was on the road, a lady and gentleman came up to me and asked if I could tell them where Lord Tennyson lived. Well, I can, I says, but there goes the Lord himself. And, do you believe it, the gentleman rushed after him, passed him a bit, then turned round to walk back and have a good look at him. I wouldn't have done it, but he did, and stared right into the lordship's face. Lots of them tried to get a good look at him, but his lordship never used to take no notice of them. He just used to walk on, looking at nothing. It's a great pity that the farmer's wife had a bad foot. She was in bed with it, and the farmer was left to carry on the work alone. He went off to shut up the chickens, but I wished that he could have stayed to conjure up more of his queer pictures of the poet. But a new moon shone clearly, and the nightingale sang in the coverts, and with such accompaniments I was able to contemplate the hill on which the poet had lived among the firs and the heather, 900 feet above the sea. There on the top of the down, the wild heather around me, and over me June's high blue. And that's the end of that chapter at 1632. We're on chapter 567. Let's see how we're doing. We have dear... Oh, yes, I've read that. Andrew Norris, blah, 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 blah. Okay, no extra chatter there then. Let's just have a slurp of water. This chapter is called Deep in the County. Now, there's a word, peripatetic. Peripatetic. Is that right? Is that a word, peripatetic? Peripatetic. To be a peripatetic showman in these days, it is necessary to be an artist and to preserve the unities. There are certain necessary materials for the craft: a quiet country, a compact village, and no superior people. Given these, a wandering vagabond can make his picture, conjure up his world, and be happy. But when he gets among villas and bungalows, estate agents and much traffic, then the vision which is within him dies, and the world becomes only possible for those who have £5,000 to spend on a desirable residence, £1,000 to spend on a car, and how many other £1,000, I wonder, for cakes and ales. And the penny showman shrinks into his rags and blushes. Oh no, not for himself, but for the simple fact that there are so many idle people who have nothing to do but plaster ugly artificial residences with hideous gardens all over the pretty hills, by which, of course, I mean Haslemere, with which I had become entangled. And it was a mistake to leave vagabonding for a couple of days in order to take the show to a garden party. The casual, spontaneous performances on the road are a thrilling adventure which terrify you beforehand, but please you inordinately when they're over. Mixed with these, the regular, polite engagement was a very tame affair, and the party itself seemed a trifle too splendid after one had become habituated to meals under the hedge. And the dreadful thought assailed me that people who hire butlers and entertainers in order to give their friends a cup of tea are all mad. Of course, I have been spoilt in the matter of tea, and having sprawled easily under the bushes of wild roses, with all summer in the surrounding fields, it was rather a drop to stand on a cropped lawn among the formal geraniums and respectable garden roses. Yet the contrast was valuable, and when I returned to the freedom of the camp in the meadow at Kingsley Green, never did evening seem more lovely with the wooded hanger of Kingsley Hill against the western sky and the wild snipe crying over the marsh. I luxuriated for a day in this hilly corner of Sussex, wandering through the woods on Marley Hill, which, if the crisis does not steepen, will soon be another Haslemere. At present it is only making up its mind to turn from its lovely wildness. At present it's only making up its mind to turn from its lovely wildness to an ugly sophistication, and you will never quite know when a shy footpath which encourages a little dishevelment, will lead you to a new road of villas and white gates which make you feel a little underdressed. But when your back is to the villas, you can still get the sight of Sussex undisturbed, and perched on the southern point of the hill, you look down over the roof of the lower woods to the heights of Blackdown Hill, and away over the wooded Weald, all over the sunny misty miles to the South Downs. And as you look over the vast natural scenes of woods and fields, you wonder what you mean when you say that it is beautiful, and if anything but those fields and trees could have any permanence in that place. A great part of the world may become urbanised. An attempt will undoubtedly be made, but the little brick residences will not be germane to the district. They can only be supported by trade, which in these days is becoming precarious and is not definitely a necessary part of that world. Down below, in a corner of a distant field, one house was visible, a stately grey house standing proudly among its more humble but no less beautiful barns. It was of the district. It had sprung from and was supported by the local power of sustaining human beings, and to the human point of view it was technically necessary. It was right. It was of its surroundings, harmonious, well-behaved and beautiful. But when villas, supported by some alien trade to the district, a trade more rich and luxurious than the simple earth has the power to provide, when such villas come to be built among these fields, then disproportion and ugliness will creep in. I was glad to have seen that view in the days of its poverty and beauty, but when it is rich and urbanised and well supplied with water, heat and H&C, I don't know what that is, heat and something, electric, phone, services generally, and then angels and ministers. Oh, sorry, and when it's supplied with H&C, anyone know what H&C might stand for? Electricity, phone and services generally, then angels and ministers of grace defend us. May I, for one, be further afield. And isn't that paragraph so powerful in its thought? Sorry, just pausing here just to take in that paragraph. This concept that houses that are built. This is something that was it not Betjeman? Was it Betjeman? I've got a book in the other room. Forget what its title is. It's a brilliant book about building materials. I know that sounds crazy. It's a beautifully written book. And basically, it talks about all the different building materials through history. But its main point is that buildings that were built from the locality. So if you're in a wooded place, the building's made from wood and plaster and laths and cob and that sort of thing. And or if it's like in the Cotswolds, if it's stone and it's made of Cotswold stone, or if it's made from those things and it's there as a necessary dwelling for human, like he's saying here, and it rises up in the country in the right place, somehow aesthetically, it just looks right. It's part of the scenery. Somehow it's beautiful, and it just seems okay. The colours, everything about it it blends in. It's part of a human managed landscape, which of course all the landscape is since the beginning of the Neolithic people. But his point here is then when you start to bring in those materials and the objects needed for life from somewhere else, H&C, hot and cold, yes, hot and cold running water, I suppose. When you start bringing in those utilities and things and bricks from somewhere else and steel and glass and all those things and tarmac and all of that, the uglification of the country begins. And he's so right, because you see it. I mean, it may not be so apparent now to some of the places in the Ribbon development because we've become so used to them since the 30s. But now when you look at the new builds that have just been dropped in as if a computer has just 3D printed them and just plonked them in, there is nothing in that looks like it should be there. They just look like army barracks or workhouses on a grand scale, and it's stunningly awful and ugly, and we accept it. It's and it's so I find this so interesting that 90 years ago people, and he's not just the first. I mean, all of them. Morton was writing about it, and Rolt in his Narrowboat book was writing about it, and J.B. Priestley was writing. Everyone was writing about this development because there was huge amount of development in at this period. How interesting. I mean, it's just the way he described it there is it just sings to me. Anyway, sorry about that slight diversion there. Having looked at this prospect, I set out to walk through it, to become a little acquainted with the people and the places hiding among those obscuring trees. The day was hot, and the road to Fernhurst busy with traffic. There was also the atmosphere of morning coffee and tea with Hovis, and coming to a stream and a by-road which looked as if it led nowhere, I promptly turned up that way. I was immediately rewarded by grateful glances from the wayside buttercups, which reached out and brushed my legs affectionately. Then I encountered some creatures on their feet, sympathetic beings to me, a herd of cows, headed gravely by a donkey, making their leisurely way to a farm. The cowherd was not on his feet. He rode a bicycle, butting the cows with the front wheel to keep them moving. But if they walked too quickly and approached the donkey, up went Neddy's pair of heels in a twinkling. An absurd cavalcade that amused me considerably more than all the 1,000 cars I had passed on the main road. Then it was some school children, a bright group, who greeted me with cries of "Punch and Judy!" and after them some cottage women who gave me information about the road and nearly made me weep by their lamentation over the few miles I had to walk. Farmers were making a sprightly attack on the hay, and I felt at home in the country once more as I wandered along the twisting lane and through the quiet woods of Tender Green. Arriving at a farm with very clean milk cans inverted outside the door and some pleasant meadows surrounding it, I thought the right moment had come to ask for a camp. Hiding behind the wall of a barn, I put on a tie and a coat, combed my hair, adjusted my costume generally, and, leaving the disreputable barrow out of sight, minced up the crazy pavement path, grinned amiably, and put my eternal question to the farmer. "Campin', is it? Then I knows where you can get a pitch for that, and that's at the Three Horseshoes, down under the hill, under Thwart Hill, and round the corner there. You go and ask Jack Smith. He'll let you have your camp, I lay he will." The inn was a timbered Tudor building surrounded with garden and orchard, and the hospitable landlord led me off at once to the orchard and selected the best position under an old spreading apple tree. I suspected him to be, like his inn, old Sussex, but he turned out to be an honest-to-goodness Cockney, bright, friendly and active, and very pleased with his lonely inn and his life in the country. "We never have a dull moment," he said, "and in the winter we get more company than the summer. I wouldn't go back to Battersea, not for anything. We're all good friends here." And so it seemed, for every customer coming in for the evening glass hailed him as Jack, and had some news for him or some cabbage plants for his garden. There had to be a performance because the landlord's daughter insisted upon it. The audience was not large, but extremely pleasant, and there were invitations afterwards to stay for a few days, when a good audience would be beaten up for me. "There's no bus comes hereabouts," they explained. "We never see anything of that sort, and if you stay till Saturday night, everyone from miles around will come here to see a show. You stay, you'll make a bit, and you're welcome to camp up along in the orchard." Other arrangements prevented the acceptance of this delightful scheme, and on the morning found me packing up in that pretty orchard on the hill. The inn was not awake when I took to the road, and I saw only a head among the roses clustering round a 15th century bedroom window, which said that I was welcome to the pitch, and would I leave the milk jug on the window sill. The milk had been a present, a pitch was a present, and the glass of beer had been a present, and the whole instinct in that very quiet place had been to welcome and trust a complete stranger, to shelter the homeless, and to honour and be amused by the artist. It was a pretty picture, in a small way, of all the virtuous human instincts rolled into one. And when I say virtuous, I do not mean something sentimental or decorative, but that quality which gives steel to steeliness, and the springs in springiness, the very life of the thing itself. And when that simple faith in generosity and kindliness can become prevalent among the powerful in the land, then a good many of the world's problems will be solved. 'Tis all that's necessary, until we can learn to behave ourselves, with becoming simplicity and generosity. The economists can spin out their intricate figures until they're blue in the face. The road went on in the right tradition. It wandered over bits of coarse-covered commons and old farms. The cottages were all museum pieces, and it would have been a pleasure to live in any one of them. The Sussex hills, richly wooded and misty with sunlight, rose on all sides against the bluest of skies. I walked in a perpetual chorus of humming bees and singing larks. All the birds were alive and singing and very watchful. If I sat under a tree for a moment, chaffinches, sparrows and robins examined me carefully from a neighbouring bush, and if they did not like the sight, they hopped about excitedly, scolding me with running chatter. Only the thrushes remained calm, continuing their gruesome business of tapping snail shells on big stones, with no more than an occasional glance at me. From the commons and lanes, the road runs into Lodsworth, a single street of little cottages, and as you turn off for Midhurst, you plunge immediately into the country again. The village has passed like a flash, and you wander up the hill and down the hill through the country that seems to be all covert, a hilly, leafy landscape drowsing in the hot sun. The way leads into the woods, standing there waiting for you in all their majestic loveliness, and after the open sunny road you're enchanted with the cool serenity that is to be found there in the bracken under the great oaks and the tall pines. Deep woods, a sunken lane, a purple rhododendron, all lead you on magnificently to the gates of Cowdray Park. Looking over this country from Marley Hill, it is difficult to realise what intricacy and variety is concealed in what seems to be nothing but trees. There is a wealth of life and beauty to be discovered, and above all, there is Cowdray Park. The public road turns through this paradise, and ice cream men, elegant cars and baker's van, the Punch and Judy, or the family party with the pram, all pass along that high open road by the great sweep of grass and the old trees. Oak and beech stand in graceful groups, in close-knit families and in pairs, and there a solitary old beech, a pale of trunk, high in limb, lifts its myriads of leaves to the heavens, while under its boughs on either side stretches the green grass and a blue line of distant country. It is that marvellous invention, the English park, at its best. It is all hills and dales with deer browsing in the glades. It has a lake, and down below the road lie the ruins of the ancient house, sufficient to see a little of the great way in which the Elizabethans lived. And while I ate my bread and cheese in the bracken, I read of the elaborate entertainings of Edward VI and Queen Elizabeth within those walls. I don't think I can get to the end of the chapter, but it would be good, wouldn't it? In Midhurst, I expected some sport, not to mention pennies from a performance, but something impelled me out of town without setting up the booth. I think the will to extract pennies from the passers-by rather than to give him pennies may have been the cause, but perhaps the attack was taken out of my intention by the inscription posted on the first house you enter into Midhurst. By order of the magistrates, all vagabonds found in this parish will be apprehended and sent to prison. Also, it was early closing day, and the place very shut up and empty. Any small space on which I might have set up the theatre and performed to nobody was already occupied by some tourist's car. Midhurst, with its Cowdray House, its old timbered inns and gabled houses, is sufficiently a show in itself, and I passed through, admiring, but not admired. Setting out for Cocking, a delightful by-road seduced me from the new boiling tar, and I walked a sleepy countryside in a vain search for adventures. South Amersham turned out to consist of one house, one inn, a barn, and a shop open only 2 days a week. So I pushed on towards Southam in search of pennies, and, had I been in a more reflective mood, might have missed it altogether, for Southam only achieves a place on the map because of 3 or 4 cottages, the smallest Norman church I've ever seen, and a railway station half a mile down the road. The day's travelling ended with a farmer putting me into his stackyard, where I made a comfortable camp on the thick dry straw which provided every opportunity of setting the ricks on fire. I was looking across the potato patch to a large mild landscape when heavy footsteps were heard approaching. Thud, thud. It was Hodge himself, who appeared round the rick, bright of complexion but weak of chin. In tones heavy, solemn and slow, he wished me good evening. I invited him into the tent to smoke a cigarette, and he lumbered in, doing his best to fetch the whole concern down. His boots alone nearly filled the tent. He was built and dressed for the open ploughlands. His costume, when you came to look at it, would have done very well for a scarecrow, and he did not look at all connected with our pretty ideas of folk songs and dance. There was not a single button on his coat, but there was some extraordinary darning operations carried out in a coarse string. His leg garments had been knickers once, and his old gaiters were bound on by the useful string again. He would not sit down, but stood, bent double, his hands on his knees and his eyes regarding his boots. He presented the crown of his head to me to talk to. "Have you ever lived in a tent?" I asked him. "No." "What, never?" "No, never seen one." "Somebody camping here?" "Somebody camping here?" "'Twere bigger than this un." "Bigger?" "Aye." "Don't you like this one? Won't you sit on the box?" He did not sit, but bowing himself before me, and still staring at his boots, he continued his evasive answers. "Who was camping in it?" "They was here fortnight." "What, Boy Scouts?" "No." "Motorists?" "No, they hadn't a car." "Were they hiking?" "They had a dog with them." There was an evasive quality about the conversation which made me pause, and I am unable to think of more brilliant questions, so I waited for him to give the lead to conversation. But he just stared at his boots, entirely uncommunicative. Decent, I thought of him to come and give me some company, but he seems difficult to talk to, and I wished that he would sit down comfortably. I explained my mission in life to him, and then inadvertently, with an eye to business, asked him another question. "What sort of place is Graffham?" "Eh?" "What sort of place is Graffham? Is it a big village?" "What, Graffham?" "Yes, Graffham." "You go down the road here to Graffham." "Yes, I know. Do you think I could get a crowd there to do my show?" "What, at Graffham?" "Yes, at Graffham." "I don't know about Graffham. If you want to get to Graffham, you go down this road here. They got a shop or two in Graffham." Life had become to an opposite standstill in the tent, while the world outside was a riot of activity. Birds were hopping about ferociously, a donkey bayed and with magnificent energy, a woman at the cottage was chatting and laughing in a glorious stream of enjoyment. Ah, how enviable life was outside of the tent. I moved out, inviting the awkward fellow to inspect my barrow. The manoeuvring got him out of the tent, and it was not long before I wished him good night and said that I must do some work, and dived into the tent again. But he followed, and again he took up his attitudes, hands on his knees, his eyes fixed on his boots, and the crown of his head presented to me to talk to. I could only accept him as one of the family, and in spite of his presence, proceeded with necessary affairs. He stood in silence. Yet he must have had some brains, and I concluded a great deal of cunning, for when he did actually go, he said, as one inspired, "We got a pub down the road. Am I going to see if I can and I'm going to go and see if I can find a pint." Just got a page and a half to go, which will end this chapter, which will be a good place to end for this week. The weather was set perpetually fine, and I went over to Graffham Common in a blaze of sunlight and radiant heat. A difficult road this for a pedestrian, as greenways over the common invite one from the road, and the dark pines, the shade. A difficult road this for a pedestrian, as greenways over the common invite one from the road, and the dark pines with shade and resinous odour call one from the heated tar. Consequently, the morning is passed in a few miles of tramping and a good deal of dallying. Graffham is a straggling village under the downs, and the public road comes to an end there. It is not at all a satisfactory village for a passing showman, organisation and the hotch-potch of business being more necessary than the art of puppet showing for the exploiting of those scattered but delightful cottages and houses. But if I did not get many pennies, there was the camp in the field with the peewits, and at night a sight of the full moon riding over the darkly luminous downs. There can be no more forgotten road in the country than the way to Hayshot, and if you would sense for a moment country life as it was 100 years ago, then make your solitary way by quiet road over the high bare common. Watch the farm boy riding bareback, his runaway plough horse, and so down to the far away forgotten village of old cottages, small and old, set about the spacious but rough and tumble green. The guidebook will tell you that Richard Cobden was born there, and you can only believe that busy man took all its energy away with him, and left the husk to lie among the fields under the downs, to go on calmly with its agricultural ways, the same now as then, shabby, unprofitable, but full of quietness and beauty, and something bigger altogether than that knowing and ephemeral little economic stratagem, which, at all events, did not prevent the lucky Victorian manufacturers from becoming the richest in the world. Even the return to the railway station at Southam did not dispel the forgotten out-of-the-world feeling of this corner of Sussex. The station stands among the fields, and the passengers alight on the wooden platform, go out onto the road with their bags and bundles, and melt away singingly, mysteriously, into the lanes for unseen faraway houses. And at that station the barrow and the showman were joined by the showman's good wife, Winifred, who had bravely determined to encounter the rigours of the road and the privations of the little tent. Oh, so he's got his wife has come down to meet him, which is why he couldn't stay at Hazelmere at the pub, because he had to go and get to visit his wife at the station at Southam. I guess the station at Southam is long gone. I'm guessing. I don't know. We will be on chapter 8, How Hard It Is to Love the Fly, which is a curious name for a chapter. But we will not be back this week coming. We will be back the week after, because I shall be away. So no peeping at the Peep show until I return. So that would be interesting. Quick look at your things, because it is now 5 o'clock. Hot and cold. You need to get your audience beaten up for you by some Richard, says Michael White. Nigel Sadler, late but hello. Andrew Noyes, me too. Laurel says, Mum and I must go to work. Wishing you, Richard and Julia and Joseph, a wonderful time on the canal journey. Thank you very much. Thumbs up if you've enjoyed this reading, please, says the lovely Julia. Thank you for that. The descriptive passages are really charming and very evocative. They are. He is a brilliant writer, and I wish he wrote more than actually had just done puppet shows, because I think he was a talent that Well, I don't know what happened to him, because he lived until 1970. Turbo Stream, wishing you both a good canal trip. I hope the weather is better than it is today. I think we've got more rain for the first couple of days, but we will persevere. Have you visited Southam Church, Rizet? I can't remember. I may well have done with Kevin. Joseph and I have wet weather gear and some jumpers, thanks to, yes, some warm jumpers. So do I. Comedy Yoke Hall. Anne H, another wonderful bit. Enjoyed your narrowboat. Enjoy narrowboat. Thank you very much. Well done, Richard. All the best for next week. And thank you, Richard. Have a great trip. Well, there we are. Thank you very much. That was it, most enjoyable. And again, it would be fun to go and revisit some of those places when I return. Thank you so much. There is a Vogue show tonight, and then there will be nothing, nothing scripted, as it were. Nothing, no Vogue shows for the week. No show, no videos in the mornings, but there will be something, but unscripted. Don't know when, on my phone, just done each day to give you some sense that we are alive and on the boat, and then I will edit up our footage that we will gather and share it with you the following week. But there we go. Nigel Sadler says, I've never been on a canal holiday when it hasn't rained much of the time. No, I'm sure it'll be very enjoyable. But there we are. Who knows? Into the Vobes void. Yes, I'm sorry about that. I hope you miss me. Until next time, thank you so much. Take care, look after yourselves, and thanks very much for watching. Goodbye. Have a good weekend. Have a good week. Till then, bye-bye.